Today I will talk about transnational subjectivities of Belarusian political nomads, and it is a part of my doctoral thesis research, which I'm doing at Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas in Lithuania. The structure of my presentation is that first I will briefly present the concepts, the data, and the methods, and then very briefly we'll talk about some context and then present the case study. So, I regard Belarusian political nomads to be a person who is resettled or live in between two places, in my case Lithuania and Belarus. Their migration decision would be informed at least partially or fully by political situation, and who have political or civil motives to stay in migration or continue nomadic lifestyle, and who continue even in migration to work on Belarusian civil issues in and outside of Belarus. I came across the concept of transnational subjectivity in an article by Myra Georgiou. She defines that transnational subjectivity as referring to people's personal experiences of travel, resettlement, and their networked world of meaningful relations as juxtaposed with their perceptions of systems of political and mediated representations that support or limit opportunities for participation in socio-economic, political, and cultural spaces they occupy. So this inspired me to ask how could transnational subjectivities of Belarusian political nomads be defined? And so now a little bit about my research. I did 23 semi-structured interviews with informants in Russian, English, or Lithuanian. The interviews were anonymous. These people were resettled in Lithuania or led a nomadic lifestyle since 1995 or later. They would work in non-governmental sector or would be an independent activist, artist, or educators. My interview focus would be their experiences of migration or life between two countries. And my analysis focused on the meaningful events and turning points in the informant's narrative. So, there are some barriers for civil activity in Belarus. Probably many of you know about them, so I just briefly mention the most important. So there are, of course, barriers for organized civic activity, like an organization has to have a premise in an office building, or there is not so much realistic membership requirements. The participation in unregistered organizations is prohibited. There are barriers for functioning and sustainability, like, for example, governmental, non-governmental NGOs, which currently even compete with authentic NGOs for EU funding, and also sanctions that target individuals, like KGB or militia persecution, expulsions from the universities, and legal cases against activists. And the emotional atmosphere of this can be described as being afraid for one's family, anger, dissatisfaction with the power structures, and etc. There would be a timeline of the legal bills, but maybe if you're interested in it, we can talk after my presentation. So, despite these barriers that I mentioned, a number of organizations and activists still do civil work in Belarus. So how does one become a political nomad? They are expelled, or legal cases are opened against them, or other type of persecution. Family member is forced to leave the country, so the person moves with them. The person discovers that there is a professionally more productive environment in the receiving country, or there is a more favorable legislation, especially the ability to receive foreign financial support. So now about the personal experiences of resettlement and living in between. The first very important factor is how the decision of resettlement or living in between was made. So if the decision for resettlement was voluntary, for example, a person decided to move to work or study, usually they are in contact with their decision. And similarly, if a person decided themselves that they want to live an in-between lifestyle, they're also in contact with the situation and sometimes even grow to like it. Also, this nomadic lifestyle is characteristic to, for example, higher positions in the job market in private and public sector across Europe. So the infrastructure to support this lifestyle where you travel in between 2 or even more countries, it exists. There is transport, food, lodging, entertainment, and etc. So the person who lives this nomadic lifestyle can even find it rather comfortable. But, however, if the resettlement is forced, it is associated with trauma, and it means leaving families, friends, belongings, jobs behind and facing the uncertainty of unexpected. Some of informants define it as going nowhere or no one waits for me there. One participant who was forced to move and then when the sanctions for him, charges for him were lifted, who came back to live in Belarus and then decided again to move voluntarily, put this like that. When you leave the country to work, it is easier because it's a free decision and you can revert it any time. So the other important factor is the experience with a new place. Even participants who said that they did not like their life in Belarus or who said that the life in Lithuania is very similar to the life in Belarus told of experiences which in different intensities resembled what anthropologist Kalervos Oberg called the cultural shock. And of course it is stressful even when home is 2 hours away because there are border checks, different living conditions, new language, new social circle, and the way daily life works is also different. As this informant defined it, it's like a snowball getting bigger and bigger. The third factor important for personal experience of resettlement is experience with the community. So informants identified the existing connections and personal relationships as a cushion factor which helped to make a smoother transition, to feel more comfortable and safe in the new place. And when asked where the closest friends and colleagues live in, many identified primarily Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine. The other important issues when talking about transnational subjectivities of Belarusian political nomads is their networked relations informed by political situation. So first factor is the understanding of the proximity, both practical and symbolic. So for Belarusians from Minsk, it is important that Vilnius, as I mentioned, is 2 hours away, and it is the most accessible place to move and establish, for example, a second office here. And also the important factor is that people understand Russian. But also because of common history, territorial proximity, multilingualism, similar Soviet period, Belarusians can understand Lithuanian society rather well. And for democratically oriented Belarusians, Vilnius often has a symbolic national value, not only because the Grand Duchy of Lithuania is considered the grounds for European identity, for Belarusian European identity, but also because in the beginning of the 20th century, Vilnius witnessed a national literary and linguistic revival. So these may be the grounds for contemporary nationalist nostalgia. When asked about the places where they feel historically and mentally close to, participants primarily identified Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine. Also, interestingly, the territories of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth or Grand Duchy of Lithuania. An important factor why transnational Belarusian subjectivity is oriented to Vilnius is a civil society network between two countries. So, thank you. Several participants describe Vilnius as a hub for civil society, and that's why the certain and critical know-how has accumulated here and within this network, and there are issues which can be answered only by fellow Belarusians who already underwent the same way, and who either know how to address or where to ask. It includes audit, taxes, local bureaucracy, and etc. Also, the important factor is international partnerships. So a number of donors interested in supporting Belarusian civil society organizations are based in Vilnius, but also international collaboration has unexpected outcomes. For example, here's an account from, an organization which stopped trying to register the foreign funding they would receive, and instead registered an office in Vilnius. So after that, they could go more freely to courts and could speak up there because they simply did not have anything to lose anymore. So when asked to identify the places where they feel most as a citizen, similarly, they identified Lithuania and Belarus primarily, but also Poland, Ukraine. But interesting that many people also identify either political Eastern Europe or the whole Europe or even the world. So to conclude, transnational subjectivities of Belarusian political nomads are politically informed. Thank you. Both personal experiences and network relations are influenced by political situation in Belarus. Transnational personal experiences are very different and range from comfort to trauma. What's interesting is, although democratic civil society in Belarus is often regarded as nationalist, but in fact geographies are more distributed, at least in the cases I researched, and cover Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Some transnational network relations are also concerned with the narratives of the past and therefore have symbolic or nostalgic value. Overall, the network relations in Vilnius function productively, and Belarusian political nomads not only exploit the existing infrastructure but are later able to give back and help other organizations to settle in Vilnius. Thank you.